So good to have you join us today. Hello and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Lee Ji-yoon in Seoul. Before we get started, let's first get a quick check of today's highlights. The government plans to foster the country's service sector as a new growth engine over the next 5 years, shifting its focus away from Korea's manufacturing-oriented economy. Korea has been reforming its financial industry with the goal to promote competition and innovation while adding convenience to its financial services. We take a look at how these reform efforts have been going and what tasks lie ahead. The government has laid out an ambitious 5-year plan to boost Korea's service sector as it looks to breathe fresh life into the overall economy. The plans include increased investment, tax breaks, and less red tape. Here's our Hwang Jie with more.
With the manufacturing sector losing steam due to sluggish global demand and fierce competition from China, Korea has its eyes now set on services. The government announced a set of measures on Tuesday to boost the service industry over the next 5 years with the aim of creating an environment that encourages capital flows into the sector. By 2020, the government will expand its financial support for the service industry by 15 trillion won, or roughly $13 billion, while doubling its ratio of R&D investment set aside for the service sector to 6%. It also plans to strip away regulations and improve tax benefits.
We will resolve the remaining problem of discrimination between the service and manufacturing sectors. To do so, the government will expand tax breaks for the service industry. We will amend tax laws so that service providers can receive tax benefits similar to those provided to the manufacturing industry.
With these measures, the government expects the country's annual growth rate to tick up by 0.1 to 0.2 percentage points every year until 2020. Much of the support will be dedicated to 7 specific fields: medical services, tourism, entertainment content, education, financial services, software development, and logistics driven by new technologies. The government aims to add 250,000 jobs in these fields by 2020, but experts say that is far from enough.
The total number of employees in the nation's service sector is at around 18 million. I'm doubtful whether fostering just a number of services will help resolve the problems surrounding employment in the overall industry.
So what is urgent, the researcher adds, is revving up the low value-added fields of service together with the high value-added sectors that the government has designated as promising new growth engines. Hwang Jie, Business Daily.
And as part of the government's drive to pursue cleaner energy, officials have drawn up a multi-billion-dollar investment plan in the renewable energy sector. Our Kim Min-ji has the details.
The Korean government will invest 42 trillion won, or over $36 billion in the renewable energy sector by 2020. This comes as part of its efforts to promote the widespread use of eco-friendly energy sources in the country, as more than 70% of Korea's power comes from non-renewable sources. The majority of the budget will be used for the construction of renewable energy power stations by 2020 that will generate 13 million kilowatts of electricity every year, the equivalent produced by 26 coal plants. The investment will also go towards upgrades in power transmission and energy storage systems. The government will also boost its scheduled renewable portfolio standard, which requires a mandatory ratio for renewable power production within the country. The RPS will be raised from the current target of 4.5% to 5% by 2018 and from 6% to 7% by 2020. It will also get rid of the excessive red tape around renewables by allowing individuals to sell the electricity they produce using their own solar panels. The plan also calls for the private sector to gradually supply electricity to consumers themselves, which will likely encourage companies to step up their investments in the industry. Until now, only state-run corporations have been allowed to buy and distribute electricity in the country. Through these plans, the government expects to generate over $14 billion in domestic consumption and create over 120,000 new jobs by 2020. Energy generated from renewable sources is also expected to reach over 20% of the total output by 2029, up from about 8% in 2015. Kim Min-ji, Business Daily.
Britain's decision to bid farewell to the European Union is causing some instability around the world, and Korea is no exception. Now, the initial shock has died down, but the lingering uncertainties are affecting Korea's foreign exchange reserves, prompting Korea to take stock of its options. Our Hwang Ho-jun has the story.
The instability continues. The Bank of Korea announced on Tuesday that Korea's foreign exchange holdings have fallen by $1 billion compared to the amount recorded in May. Reserves are now below $370 billion for the first time since the end of March. The central bank attributes the decrease to the fall in the value amount when converting foreign currency assets, including the British pound and other currencies, into US dollars. Ever since the UK voted in favor of Brexit, the value of British pound has plunged 8% and euro 0.2% from where it was in May. As experts expect the greenback to continue to gain ground, some are raising the idea of Korea renewing its currency swap agreement with the US, which ended in early 2010. A currency swap deal is when two countries agree to exchange two currencies at a certain exchange rate during financial emergencies. Once the initial agreement is set, cash flows can be exchanged in the appropriate currency for the contracted time.
Considering the exchange rate market can help stabilize the capital market, we plan to urge the government to expand currency swap deals with the US and China.
However, the Korean government is cautiously assessing its options, as currency swap deals are only a viable option when there's mutual agreement between the two countries on the need for them. Hwang Ho-jun, Business Daily.
Reforming Korea's public, labor, education, and finance sectors has been at the top of the government's to-do list ever since last year. And for the months of July and August, the government is planning to analyze and re-examine just how far it has come in these reforms and what more needs to be done in the remaining half of this year. Take a look.
The Korean government's four major reform plans are focused on reviving the slowing economy and fundamentally changing the country's economic makeup to promote competition and innovation. Financial authorities have lifted a slew of regulations and established the FinTech Center of Korea to provide counseling on financing and legal issues for local FinTech firms and other related startups. Korea's first internet-only banks, which will be introduced later this year, are also expected to boost the banking sector, as these online platforms can offer services through smartphones and other mobile devices. For example, people will be able to transfer their money to others through their KakaoTalk messaging accounts, as a consortium led by its operator won a preliminary license to run a non-brick-and-mortar bank. But despite such changes, not as many people are yet aware of the ongoing reforms and don't feel they've dramatically changed the way they use financial services. So, with a year and a half into the government's reform efforts, what tasks lie ahead for Korea to improve its financial landscape?
For more on this topic, Professor Yang Jun-seok from the Catholic University of Korea joins us in the studio today. So good to see you, Professor.
Happy to be here.
So among the government's four reform plans, what goals have been laid out for the financial sector?
Okay, well, the Park administration has actually given a lot of diverse goals. For example, the so-called fintech, the financial technology where you have easier online banking. So the Park administration has been trying to introduce online-only banks, and then having an environment more conducive to innovative financial sectors. So you have things like trying to get performance pay, reducing command and control type of regulations on the financial industry, and so on. And then third, having more financial products, especially ones designed for the lower and middle class, and trying to help the government, help the people more directly. So more lending to designed for middle class and lower income people, funds which are designed to invest in high technology firms and so on. And then fourth, more competition among financial companies. That not only includes competition among banks, but also competition among banks and other types of financial institutions.
Okay.
And then finally, changes in law to support these type of changes.
Now, but then the need for these reforms has been brought up over the years. So why the push now? I mean, what kind of problems has the sector faced up until now?
Okay, well, we've been trying to fix the financial sector for a long time. There has been mentions of financial reform since the Kim Young-sam administration in the early 1990s, and you can arguably say that financial reform began in the 1980s when government started to sell some of its state-owned banks and reduce control over the banks. And if you look at the big picture, then it's actually been fairly consistent. What Korea wants to do is increase competition and efficiency because Korean financial industry has been known for its inefficiency and its lack of adventurousness. And then trying to reorganize the financial institutions from many different categories into four major categories: the commercial banks, insurance companies, credit finance companies, and then what hopefully will develop into investment banks, whether now security companies, some remaining trust companies. We don't have them anymore, but merchant banks. We've been trying to consolidate them into sort of a mixed category. Then we can develop them into investment banks that we hear so much about in UK and US. And then third, remove barriers and protection among different types of financial institutions so you can increase competition, and then change regulatory structure to allow more adventurous, risky banking. And the Park administration reforms fit basically into this format. Maybe the difference is that while in the past they had these grandiose, comprehensive plans, right now the Park administration seems to be more interested in targeting specific, pragmatic initiatives.
All right.
This has the advantage that it may actually help people, and it may actually scratch where it needs, where it tickles. But it does leave the problem of what to do with sort of systematic structural problems. And that I don't think it's being dealt with as much as it could be.
But then let's turn our focus to some of the accomplishments that have been made in this sector up until since it was launched last year.
Yeah, well, we made a lot of headways in trying to get fintech in place. We have made online banking a lot easier, not only with the introduction of online-only banks, but we have tried to make the online banking experience easier by reducing a lot of regulations which go along with online banking. Also, we have introduced a lot of new products, the ISA, individual savings accounts being the most famous. But we also introduced, as I mentioned before, several funds which try to gather funds to invest in high-tech industries and so on. So in those limited areas, we've actually been making some progress.
Now, I think we could say that creating a culture for a performance-based wage system is something that the Korean government has been pushing actively for. Have we seen any concrete results from this?
Okay, well, 9 banks which are either owned or controlled mostly by the government or the Financial Securities Commission or the deposit insurance has taken on performance pay. So has the Industrial Bank of Korea and Korea Development Bank. They're trying to convince the private commercial banks to put in performance banking as well. But those companies are so used to having this type of pay system where the longer you work, the more you get paid. So the unions are very reluctant to change it. But we do need at least some kind of measures to improve efficiency. For example, the return on assets on Korean financial industry is only 0.16%, whereas in the U.S. in 2015, the first half of the year, it was 1.05.
Oh, okay.
Return on equity it was just 2.14% for Korea, whereas it was 9.39% for the U.S.
Wow.
So we're really far behind what could be called the state-of-the-art financial sector. And as we saw earlier in the news, because Korea is trying to develop the financial sector as one of the high-valued engine of growth in the future, unless we can get more profitability, unless we can get more efficiency out of the financial sector, it's going to be impossible to do that.
What are some related bills that are waiting to be passed? What needs to be done in order for these reform efforts to bear fruit?
Okay, well, they're changing a slew of laws, the Banking Act, the Financial Market Act, Insurance Business Act. This one's interesting for me personally, Financial Consumer Protection Act, because that will give a lot of protection to financial consumers, and there's been a lot of problems because, especially among the older people, they do not fully understand these new financial products.
Right.
Having said that, though, there has been a lot of little pragmatic differences, which will be helpful to a lot of people. But I think the fundamental problem of Korean financial industry, the structural problem, is not being solved, which is that, one, these financial institutions are too big to fail. Because Korea thought that in order to become a global player, we had to have large firms. We merged a lot of the banks, merged a lot of financial institutions, and now if some of them go under, that will have major consequences for the Korean economy. And given that these firms are too big to fail, a lot of them, well, in some countries, they become too adventurous. In Korea, they seem to have become too complacent because they know that government will be looking over them all the time. If they get into trouble, government will rescue them. So they seem to become very complacent, and they don't take part in that much risky ventures which can pay off in high profits. So unless that structural aspect can be addressed, I think Korea's fundamental problem with the financial sector will not be addressed. And sadly, that's not being looked at very carefully for now.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your insight today, Professor.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.